man, I'm trying to do the best that I can with what it is I have. I ain't no perfect man, I'm trying to do the best that I can with what it is I have. Put my heart and soul into the song. Yes, yes. I hope you feel me.
All right, welcome back, Uniondale High School. This is, I believe, my second installment of our virtual professional development platform. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about Domain 2, which speaks a lot about creating a classroom environment that is conducive to learning. And as teachers, we know that our students, we love our students, and they come to us with wide range of challenges. And it's really important for us to create an environment where they feel welcomed, they feel liked, they feel appreciated, and creating that environment to improve their educational outcomes. So the research question that I generated comes from Danielson's framework, specifically Domain 2. And the question is, what is the relative impact of creating a safe, nurturing learning environment on student outcomes, such as academic achievement, social emotional development, and their overall well being? So, Danielson's framework looks at a couple of different components within the framework to help us establish a healthy classroom environment. One is respect and rapport. Now, the term respect and rapport means different things to different people. And in Danielson, it says creating an environment of respect and rapport, establishing a classroom culture characterized by mutual respect, trust, and positive relationships between the teacher and student. So, depending on how you was raised and where you was raised and when you were raised, respect means different things to different people. Then there's thoughts about respect that interact with a person's race or gender or religious beliefs that we have to think about. Next is establishing a culture for learning. Now, establishing a culture for learning, again, is something that we have to consider based on our different biases that we have within us. And in Danielson's framework, it says cultivating a classroom environment that values hard work, perseverance, and a shared belief in the importance of learning. A culture for learning, again, can be very subjective, depending on where you was raised or how you grew up learning. So, for example, if you grew up in a learning environment where everyone is to sit down quietly and follow all directions, and if you come into a school where that's not happening, you don't necessarily believe that that is a culture of learning. But for some of us who grew up in student-centered instruction classroom and centered in student-centered instructional classrooms where it's project-based and it's collaborative learning, we understand that learning looks different for different people. Next, which is really, really important, is managing classroom procedures and routines. We have to implement efficient and effective routines and procedures to minimize disruptions and maximize instructional times. A lack of routines creates more stress for teachers and students. In order to create a routine, it's said that research states that you need to be consistent for at least 30 days. And for us as teachers, when we are not prepared and when we're not structured, students can feel it and they respond by disrupting the classroom. So we have to be consistent with our procedures and our routines. And finally, creating a space that is organized and arranged for the purpose of learning. Now, the problem statement that comes to mind for me is around teacher burnout. A study titled The Influence of Classroom Instruction on Teachers' Perception of Themselves and Their Students. The study explores how classroom disruptions, such as disrespectful behavior and academic challenges, can negatively impact a teacher's self-esteem. Next, another research article titled "As Educators Struggle with Stress, Unions Step In" by Wallace in 2023. It was published in the NEA Today. The article discusses the increased levels of stress and burnout experienced by teachers due to factors such as student burnout, workload, and a lack of resources. It highlights the roles of teacher unions in advocating for their well being and addressing these challenges. So, what's happening is teachers, when we talk about the pandemic and what has happened to students in terms of learning loss, there's also been an increase in teacher burnout. And it's been very difficult for teachers to manage sometimes 150 students a day and manage behaviors. And unions are starting to see that there's a deeper problem, and they are going about protecting their teachers as much as they possibly can. Another article titled The Impact of Student Misbehavior on Teacher Stress and Job Satisfaction, which was published by M.R. Smith in 2015. The study examines the relationship between student misbehavior and teacher stress, finding that frequent disruptions and disrespectful behavior can significantly contribute to teacher burnout and job satisfaction. In another article titled Teacher Burnout, the same thing. So, what we see, and then there's mental health, and it's something that I wanted to talk a little bit about regarding teachers. There's an article titled The Mental Health Crisis in Education: How Schools Can Support Teachers. And this article highlights the growing mental health crisis amongst teachers and emphasizes the need for schools to provide adequate support and resource to help teachers cope with stress and burnout. And I just want to stop there because I have friends who teach and I enjoy teaching as well. And what happens and what's happening now is a lot of teachers are walking away from the profession because they don't feel supported, they don't feel protected, and they honestly just feel as if it's not worth it anymore. So we really got to be careful of, we want to create a learning environment that is conducive for learning for students, but we also want to protect teachers, which are our most, a very valuable component of any school building is making sure that our teachers are doing well. I wanted to look at some of the theoretical frameworks that support the notion of creating a learning environment that is safe and nurturing for students. Maslow's theory, we all pretty much have grown up learning all about it. One, it talks about the physical needs. You know, some of our students are coming into schools struggling in so many different ways, and teachers are not aware. We end up getting the brunt of it afterwards, but our students are struggling with homelessness. They have issues going on at home. And even for the students who don't have those issues, they have other things happening that they are struggling with. So it makes it very difficult for them to come into a learning space and be focused on academics because those basic needs aren't being met. Then there's safety. If you come into a school where you feel afraid, if there's bullying happening, whether staff members know it or not, it makes it very difficult for a student to focus on their academics. Next, it's feeling loved and feeling a sense of belonging. For many of our students, uh, they participate in clubs and groups and sports, they play music, but then there's some that don't participate in any of these extracurricular activities and they feel very much isolated, like as if they don't have a tribe or a group that they can call their own. And it makes it difficult for them to come into school and focus on learning because of that. Then there's students that struggle with low self-esteem. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, since social media has been created, and narcissism among students and insecurity among students have grown, it's become very difficult for teenagers to come into school and want to learn anything. There's so much peer pressure around being in a relationship or using a certain type of drug or drinking alcohol or being affiliated with some kind of gang that it becomes almost impossible for some of our students to focus on academics. And so for us as educators, we have to figure out how can we meet some of those needs in the school building. Now, teachers will hear this and say, well, I can't control all of these other factors. And that's not necessarily my job. And I do hear where you're coming from. But when students come into our classrooms, that we have to, as much as we possibly can, protect them from those other factors. And by addressing some of these students' basic needs, a positive learning environment will enable them to focus on learning and their personal growth. Another theory that came to mind is self-determination. The first part of the self-determination theory is autonomy. We have to allow students to make choices in their learning and feel in control of their education. This is where differentiation is important, and you give students options as to how they may learn something. And we'll talk a little bit about differentiation during another video. Next, there's competence, providing opportunities for students to feel capable and successful in their learning activity. Again, this goes back to instruction and assessing exactly where students are and how you can meet them and scaffold work to get them to where they need to be. And again, this is something that we'll talk about when we look at domain 3 around assessing students and providing instruction that meets their needs academically. Next, relatedness. Encourage the development of meaningful relationships between students, peers, and teachers. The way that you encourage it and what works for me is being relatable and talking about some of your challenges as a teenager. Sometimes when I hear folks say that they can't relate to the students, I always ask myself, where were you and how were you as a teenager? Did you not go through any of these challenges? And I think once we start to be a little bit more relatable, we'll understand some of our students' behaviors. So, some of the ways that you can foster a positive learning environment: establishing clear expectations, set clear guidelines for respectful behavior. We sometimes assume that students know what respectful behavior is based on our interpretation and based on our experiences. And it's really important that we're clear about what does it mean to be respectful, because some students really don't know what that means for you as a teacher. And it's different for different teachers. For example, there's one teacher that might be okay with students calling them by their last name, is another teacher that might not feel too great about it. So you want to be very clear about what respectful means to you in your classroom. Promoting inclusive practices. Celebrate diversity, accommodate different learning styles, and ensure all students feel valued and heard. We serve a large population of diverse learners, some students that speak a different language, students with varying levels of capacity in different content areas. When you teach one way to all of the students, you're literally telling them without telling them that you don't value their diversity in terms of who they are and their learning style or their language. So again, by differentiating your instruction, you're letting students know that you want them to be a part of the learning process. Encouraging collaboration. Make sure that you get students to work in groups. This is something that I'm going to be talking about forever. And again, it doesn't need to happen every single period, but you want to differentiate the way that you structure your classroom, whether you have students in rows or pairs and groups. You want students to start learning together. And this follows Vygotsky's theory of constructivism, and something that we'll be talking about a little bit more when we look at domain 3. Provide constructive feedback. And it's really important that we differentiate what's constructive and what's destructive. Feedback sometimes, depending on the way that you say it to students, can be hurtful and it can be demeaning and belittling. So we want to be careful about the way that we provide feedback to students. We also want to be loud about the things that they do well, and we want to correct them privately. And that really changes the dynamics in the classroom. And cultivating positive relationships. Actively engage with students. Show genuine interest in their well being and create a warm and caring classroom atmosphere. The things that students love and like, you have to also be interested in, because they want to know that you care about what they care about just as much as you want them to care about what you care about as an educator. I wanted to take a minute and look at this video on the impact of positive and negative reinforcement.
Operant conditioning is a type of learning where the consequences of your behaviors shape your future behaviors. Those consequences may be either a reinforcement or a punishment. We will be focusing on the following terminology. After each example, we'll see how the terminology can fit into this chart as to whether a stimulus is being presented or removed, and whether the subsequent behavior increased or decreased. For our first example, we have a student who is working diligently on her schoolwork. As a consequence, the teacher could show his appreciation for her hard work by providing positive feedback. In return, the student continues to work hard. In that example, we had a stimulus being presented, which caused behavior to increase. Therefore, we would call this positive reinforcement. For our next student, we again have a good student who is working diligently on her coursework. As a consequence, he could remove some of her work, such as dropping a quiz or removing a homework assignment. This would make her happy and want to continue to work hard. In this example, a stimulus was removed, that was the quiz or the homework assignment that was being removed, in order to cause the student's good behavior to increase, which would be negative reinforcement. For our third example, we have a student who has fallen asleep during class. As a consequence, the teacher may get upset and verbally scold the student to wake him up. The misbehavior of sleeping would then stop and the student would start to focus on classwork again. In this instance, a stimulus was being presented, the verbal scolding, in order for the misbehavior to decrease. So we would call this positive punishment. In our last example, we have a student who is using their cell phone during class. As a consequence for this misbehavior, the teacher could go over to the student's desk and confiscate the cell phone. The student's misbehavior would decrease and they could focus on their work again. So, due to a stimulus being removed, the misbehavior decreased, which would be negative punishment. And those are the basic types of reinforcement and punishment.
So again, some of these videos, sometimes you look at it and you're like, okay, is that realistic? You want to take away from it what you can and apply it as much as you can in your classrooms. Again, there's some things that we can and cannot do in schools, but we want to think about this and ask yourself, are you using the power of positive reinforcement to improve student outcomes? And I wanted to use this graph just to show you the importance and power of positive reinforcement. And here it shows you the percentage of athletes who felt recognized and celebrated for their achievements. Olympic gold medalists said that 95% of the time they were recognized for their achievements in their given sports. Professional sports all stars, 87%. College sports champions, 82%. High school sports MVP, 72%. So what you see is there's a positive correlation to success on the field and positive reinforcement. I believe the same is true for our students as well. So some of the things, again, that helps students to feel important and feel good about themselves is differentiated instruction and making sure that you're meeting the needs of different types of students. For example, Wilma Rudolph famously credits her teachers with playing a crucial role in her success. This three-time Olympic gold medalist talks about how much they encouraged her to pursue her dreams. Next is Bethany Hamilton. She spoke so highly of the support she received from her teachers during her recovery from a vicious shark attack that resulted in the loss of her left arm. Her teachers provided her with emotional support, flexibility, and understanding. Next is Stephen Hawkins, a renowned theoretical physicist who talks about the important role that teachers played in his life and helping him to pursue his dreams. And next, Misty Copeland, who's just absolutely amazing, who talks about how teachers also helped her to pursue her dreams, even though she was an African American and she didn't necessarily fulfill some of the attributes of the typical person in dance, in ballet. She really chased her dreams. So I thought that was some good examples that we can look at in terms of the importance of positive reinforcement for our students. The movies that come to mind, and I know I'm dating myself around managing classroom behavior, is The Breakfast Club. In this classic 1980s film, a group of high school students from different social cliques are forced to spend a Saturday detention together. Through conflict and discussion, they learn to understand and respect each other's perspectives. Next, Remember the Titans. Such an important, powerful movie to me. The film depicts a newly integrated high school football team that must overcome racial tensions and learn to work together as a cohesive unit in order to succeed on the field. The coach's effective conflict resolution strategies emphasize and emphasis on teamwork serve as a model for managing classroom behavior. Then there's Dead Poets Society. In this film, a nonconformist teacher encourages his students to think independently and challenge the status quo. His approach to fostering creativity and self expression while maintaining discipline provides insights into managing a diverse classroom environment. And finally, Freedom Riders. Such an emotional movie. Loved it. And again, I'm telling on myself in terms of my age. The film follows a dedicated teacher who helps a group of at risk students find their voices and overcome the challenges of their urban environment. Her strategies for building trust, fostering empathy, and promoting collaboration can be applied to managing classroom behavior. And again, everyone has a different style, a different way of managing classroom behavior. You have to choose and figure out what works for you. I wanted to show a clip from Freedom Riders.
Miss G, can I read something from my diary?
That'd be great.
Who is he?
Man, he's been with us since freshman year, fool.
What's his name?
I don't know.
The summer was the worst summer in my short 14 years of life. It all started with a phone call. My mother was crying and begging, asking for more time, as if she were gasping for her last breath of air. She held me as tight as she could and cried. Her tears hit my shirt like bullets and told me we were being evicted. She kept apologizing to me. I thought I have no home. I should have asked for something less expensive at Christmas. On the morning of the eviction, a hard knock on the door woke me up. The sheriff was there to do his job. I looked up at the sky, waiting for something to happen. My mother has no family to lean on, no money coming in. Why bother coming to school or getting good grades if I'm homeless? The bus stops in front of the school. I feel like throwing up. I'm wearing clothes from last year, some old shoes, and no new haircut. I kept thinking I'd get laughed at. Instead, I'm greeted by a couple of friends who were in my English class last year. And it hits me. Mrs. Gurwal, my crazy English teacher from last year, is the only person that made me think of hope. Talking with friends about last year's English and our trips, I began to feel better. I received my schedule, and the first teacher is Mrs. Gurwal in room 203. I walk into the room and feel as though all the problems in life are not so important anymore. I am home.
Man, that was powerful. And for us as teachers, we always have to remember that we don't realize how important that classroom is for a lot of students. And so we have to do everything in our power to ensure that we are creating an environment that is welcoming to all of the students that come through our doors. A couple of tips in order to create that environment: use pop culture, use music, use videos, YouTube. is a great tool. Think about all of the different ways that you can incorporate the things that they like into the classroom. I try, but there's times that I sound kind of corny because I don't know all of the new lingo and music that they use. But the effort is what most students appreciate. Think about sports, athletics, discuss current topics that you know the students might be interested in. By using these different pieces, it really helps to create that environment for students. And in terms of fostering student participation, ask thought-provoking questions, incorporate interactive activities, encourage peer-to-peer interaction, and use technology to facilitate engagement. All of these different things help to raise the level of engagement, but it also creates a fun learning environment where students want to be in class and they want to participate. So I hope that this helps. I hope that some of the things that I shared will help to improve you in terms of your practice in Domain 2 in creating a learning environment that improves student outcomes and creates a sense of joy in the classroom. Thank you.